The badge and the gavel prologue, small town Shadow Cottonwood Springs, was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Located in the heart of the Deep South, it was a place steeped in history, where old traditions clashed with the slow, relentless march of progress. Cottonwood Springs had two faces, one of Southern charm, with its white picket fences, quaint diners, and community fairs, and another, darker face, where prejudice simmered just beneath the surface. Officer Ryan McCall was a product of this town. 35 years old, he had grown up believing in the US versus them mentality passed down by his father, a former sheriff. Ryan wasn't overtly racist, at least not in his mind. He had black colleagues on the force, and even exchanged pleasantries with the older black couple who ran the local grocery store. But deep down, he carried biases he had never questioned, and his badge often emboldened those prejudices. When Ryan's path crossed with a woman named Camille Winters one fateful afternoon, his world and his entire belief system would be turned upside down. Chapter 1. The arrest. It was a sweltering July afternoon when Officer McCall spotted the black sedan parked slightly askew in front of the Cottonwood Springs Cafe. The vehicle stood out, not because it was particularly flashy, but because it had out-of-state plates. Ryan, patrolling his usual route, pulled over and got out of his cruiser. He adjusted his sunglasses, the sun glinting off his badge, and approached the car. Inside sat a well-dressed black woman in her late 30s. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer and matching skirt, her hair pulled back into a sleek bun. The woman was typing something on her phone, her face calm and focused. Ryan's first thought was suspicion. Out-of-towners rarely stopped in Cottonwood Springs unless they were lost, and her polished appearance didn't match the town's casual vibe. He knocked on her window. The woman rolled it down, her expression neutral. "Good afternoon, officer." "Is there a problem?" Ryan glanced at her license plate and frowned. "You're parked a little crooked," he said. "Can I see your license and registration?" The woman raised an eyebrow but complied, handing over her documents without protest. "I'm just grabbing a quick bite before I head to the courthouse," she said. Ryan barely listened as he studied her license. Camille Winters. The name didn't ring a bell, and her Georgia address only made him more suspicious. "What brings you to Cottonwood Springs?" he asked, his tone sharper than necessary. "I'm here for work," she replied evenly. "Is there a reason you're questioning me, officer?" Her calm demeanor irritated Ryan. "Mom, I'll ask the questions," he snapped. "Step out of the vehicle." Camille hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I don't understand. Have I done something wrong?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated. Reluctantly, Camille opened the door and stepped onto the sidewalk. Ryan immediately noticed her confident posture and the way she held her head high, as if she were used to commanding respect. It unnerved him. "Turn around and place your hands on the car," he ordered. "What?" Camille's calm mask slipped, replaced by disbelief. "Officer, this is unnecessary. I haven't done anything." Ryan's hand hovered over his holster. "Do it. Now." People in the cafe had begun to notice the commotion. Camille, clearly aware of the growing audience, took a deep breath and complied. Ryan patted her down, his touch rougher than it needed to be. Finding nothing, he stepped back, his frustration mounting. "I'm detaining you for further questioning," he said. Camille turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "On what grounds?" Ryan faltered. He had no legitimate answer, only flimsy suspicions, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I'll explain at the station," he said gruffly. Camille stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. "Fine. Let's go." Chapter 2. The Revelatio. The Cottonwood Springs police station was small, with outdated equipment and a staff of only 10 officers. Ryan escorted Camille inside, ignoring her composed silence. He placed her in an interrogation room and sat across from her, his notepad and pen at the ready. "So, Mrs. Winters," he began, "why don't you tell me what you're really doing in Cottonwood Springs?" Camille met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I already told you. I'm here for work." "What kind of work?" She leaned back in her chair. "I'm a judge." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "A judge?" he repeated skeptically. "Yes," Camille said, her voice steady. "I was recently appointed to the Georgia State Court of Appeals. I'm here to preside over a case that was moved to the Cottonwood Springs courthouse due to a conflict of interest in the original jurisdiction." Ryan stared at her, his mind racing. A judge? That couldn't be right. She didn't look like any judge he'd ever seen. Not that he'd met many. "You expect me to believe that?" He scoffed. Camille folded her arms. "Call the courthouse. Or better yet, Google my name. Camille Winters." Ryan hesitated, then stood abruptly and left the room. He marched to his desk, pulled out his phone, and typed her name into the search bar. Within seconds, the screen filled with articles and photos. Judge Camille Winters, the youngest judge appointed to the Georgia State Court of Appeals. There she was, smiling in her judicial robe, shaking hands with the governor. Ryan's stomach sank. He felt a wave of panic and shame, followed by defensiveness. Maybe she was a judge, but that didn't mean she was above the law. He decided to double down. Chapter 3. The confrontation. When Ryan returned to the interrogation room, Camille was sitting exactly as he'd left her, her calm demeanor intact. He dropped a printout of her bio on the table. "Looks like you were telling the truth," he muttered. Camille's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm glad you took the time to verify." Ryan sat down, his pride stinging. "Even so, you were acting suspiciously." "I was just doing my job." "Was it your job to humiliate me in public?" Camille asked, her voice sharp. "To pat me down on the sidewalk in front of an audience? To assume I was up to no good because I don't look like you?" Ryan bristled. "I don't see color, Mom. I treat everyone the same." Camille's smile vanished. "That's a convenient lie, Officer McCall. You saw a black woman in an out-of-state car, and you assumed I didn't belong. You didn't see me as a person, let alone a judge. You saw a threat." Ryan opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had acted on instinct, and that instinct had been rooted in bias. "I didn't mean," he began, but Camille cut him off. "I've spent my entire career fighting for justice," she said, her voice rising. "And people like you make it harder every step of the way. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a courtroom and have to prove yourself 10 times over because of the color of your skin? Do you know what it's like to be doubted, dismissed, or disrespected before you even open your mouth?" Ryan had no answer. He felt small and exposed under her gaze. Chapter 4. A lesson learned. The police chief, a grizzled man named Hank Lawson, entered the room moments later. He took one look at Camille and froze. "Judge Winters," he said, his face pale. "I'm so sorry for this misunderstanding." "Officer McCall, step outside." Ryan obeyed, his heart pounding. Outside, Chief Lawson tore into him. "Do you have any idea who she is? Do you realize the trouble you've caused? She could have your badge for this." Ryan swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Lawson snapped. "You didn't think. You let your biases get the better of you. Now go back in there and apologize." "Sincerely." Ryan nodded, his shame overwhelming. He re-entered the room and faced Camille, who watched him with an air of quiet authority. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong." Camille studied him for a moment before standing. "Apology accepted, officer. But let this be a lesson. Your badge doesn't give you the right to judge people based on assumptions. It gives you the responsibility to protect and serve everyone. Without prejudice." Ryan nodded, her words sinking in deeper than he expected. Epilogue. Change takes Tim in the weeks that followed. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Camille Winters. Her words haunted him, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had ignored for years. He began attending bias training sessions, reading books about systemic racism, and having difficult conversations with colleagues. Camille, meanwhile, continued her work as a judge, using her platform to advocate for justice and equality. She didn't dwell on her encounter with Officer McCall, but she hoped it had planted a seed of change back in Cottonwood Springs. Ryan McCall was no longer the same man. He still had a long way to go, but he had taken the first step toward becoming the officer and the person he was meant to be. This story reflects themes of accountability, growth, and the importance of confronting implicit bias, offering a message of hope and redemption in the face of prejudice.